You know, one of the ways that we can seek to make the scriptures come to life is to try to do whatever we can to put ourselves in that setting. So we're going to do that this morning. If you want to put that next slide up on the screen for us. We're going to look at a map. So as you can see, up at the top is the Sea of Galilee. You come down the Jordan River, Dead Sea. So we're going to make our sanctuary that this morning. So we have the Sea of Galilee. We run through the Jordan River, and down there in the back, sorry people, but that's the Dead Sea. Okay? Over here is the Mediterranean. Now when we read Matthew chapter 1, it spoke of Jerusalem. So you can see where Jerusalem is down at the bottom of the map, the top of the Dead Sea. So just for a quick moment, the top of a map is which direction? Okay, some of you all don't, you guys do map, you guys just put in your things, you don't even pay attention to direction anymore. The top of the map is north, okay? For those of you who don't know, the top of the map is north. Okay, everybody together, it's what? North. Oh, some of you are still sleeping. Sorry. The top of the map is what? North. Okay, so then that direction is east, and that'd be west, and that direction's south, okay? So now, what we're going to do is, like in anything, this is where I start getting lost. We're going to zoom in. Next slide. Okay, so now we're zooming into Jerusalem. As you can see, the Dead Sea is about off of the picture. So there's Jerusalem. Don't so much pay attention to those other areas. You can if you want, but that's not what we're going to focus in on. So now we're zooming in. So if we're zooming it all up, now the sanctuary is becoming, the Dead Sea's kind of going way back there, and then we're getting into Jerusalem. Now, hopefully none of you guys get dizzy, because now we're going to take the map and we're going to spin it. Okay? So we're facing this direction, and now we're going to do a 45-degree pivot. So give us the next slide. Okay. So as you can see, we are in Jerusalem. And what we can see down here on the slide is Bethany. Now, some people say that Bethphage is up here. You can look at other maps, and they'll say we think Bethphage is down here, because it says here in parentheses, possible site. So why am I doing all of that? Because what we just did now is that since we've pivoted, we have then the Dead Sea is way back there now, because we did it at 45. The Dead Sea's way over there, and so we're going to go up the road. So now what we're doing, we're sitting here in the church and we're facing this direction on the map. So here's where we're going to have some fun. All right? Jerusalem is on an elevation. So the Stouts, what they didn't know is where the red barn is at the top of the hill up there, okay? Y'all have been up the hill, all right? And you go down off the other side, you get to Burles, okay? At the top of the hill, that today for us is Jerusalem. So when you're coming up Millertown Road, that is the road taking us up, the Jericho Road, coming up to Jerusalem. So now when you're going to say, we're going to go to church, and you're coming up Millertown Road, you said, hey, do you know Jerusalem's at the top of the hill up there, okay? But that's where they're going to be coming, is Jerusalem. So to kind of come at it from this way, Bethany is about 2 miles from Jerusalem. So we're going to go get in our cars. We're going to drive down the road. We're going to go on Connor Road to Back Creek. We're going to go almost to the Morrisons to Fowl Hill. Okay? That's about the distance from Jerusalem to Bethany. Now Jesus will do that what? He's going to come walking on it at some point. He's going to get on a donkey. What you see also in the middle of the two roads is what? The Mount of Olives. So we have the Mount of Olives. So Jesus is going to come from Bethany. Whichever way it goes, it's going to go on one side of the Mount of Olives or the other, but we're going to end up in Jerusalem. So to try to put ourselves in what Jesus was experiencing and what happened, we're going to go down to Fowl Hill. We're going to start out there. Jesus is going to leave Bethany. What happened in Bethany? It was read in the text, I think. I've read so many texts of the parallels of the... Who was from Bethany? A man by the name of Lazarus. And what happened to Lazarus? He died. And then what did Jesus do? John 11. He raised him from the dead. So just 2 miles from the top of the hill up here. So when you see the Stouts, just tell them, hey, you guys know you have Jerusalem up there. Okay? So just 2 miles away, down on Fowl Hill, something miraculous happened. A dead man was taken out of the grave and brought to life. So he's coming up then, Back Creek Road, coming up Connor Road, passing here, and he's going up to Jerusalem. So that's kind of just to put us in a map setting to try to help us to see as we look at what Jesus did, because otherwise it's just kind of words on a page. Go ahead and show me the next slide as well. So now we're zooming in even a little bit more. And so here's the Mount of Olives, and this is coming into Jerusalem, and this is where everything Thursday, Friday, Saturday will happen. Is it up in that area? Now again, the map has been spun because we're putting Jerusalem up on the top of the hill. So as we think about that, so as we read that, as you go back to Matthew chapter 21 with me, it said, and when they drew near unto Jerusalem, and were come unto Bethphage, unto the Mount of Olives. Now the Mount of Olives, as you can see, isn't very far from Jerusalem. You also see on here, it has nothing to do with our text, but there's the Kidron Valley. So you're on an elevation, you go down and you come up. So this isn't quite proportionate, but it'd be kind of like if you were coming from Melcroft, and how many of you have ever come across Fowl Hill from 7-Eleven over to Back Creek? It's an adventure, okay? Don't go in your low-lying car. You probably want to have four-wheel drive on some days to come up and over that, because you get to the top, it's dirt and all of that exciting stuff. But it would be kind of that idea that Jesus would come up, go over that. He's now down in the valley, and then as he gets, the reason why you will always read in the scriptures that they went up to Jerusalem, because it doesn't matter which way you go. So if you go up and over, you end up at Burl's house. And then, some other people too. But on Burl's house, but here's the point. If you were to go from Burl's house and wants to go up to the top, she has to go what? You have to go up. If you're going to go here to go to Jerusalem, you got to go up. So it doesn't matter what direction you're coming from. Jerusalem's always what? Up. Because it's a higher elevation. You guys don't use north, south, east, and west. Here, you just say what? If we're going to town, you don't say you're going to town, you're doing what? You're going off the mountain. Doesn't matter what direction it is and which place you're going. No matter what place you go to, you're going what? Off the mountain. Why? Because it's a higher elevation. So that is the way that it is with Jerusalem. Jerusalem's on a higher elevation. Now, this is just for your own personal reading and just to whet your appetites a little bit. But if you were to go back and read during the time of David, David would capture Jerusalem. And that's when it would become the city of David. So think of it this way. So if you're ever having a snowball fight, if you're on level ground, you're kind of equal. But if you were having a snowball fight and it wasn't level ground, where do you want to be? Higher elevation. You have an advantage. And so it is. The idea, Jerusalem's bigger than going up to the top of the hill and back down the other side. But Jerusalem's from that standpoint. No matter which direction you came at Jerusalem, you had to go up. So the advantage was to be at the top of the hill. And so Jesus is coming into this particular moment to try to put us into the setting then. So as we read in chapter 21, that Jesus has left now Bethany, which was down here, and now he's coming up and he's getting closer, and he says, all right, go get me the donkey and the colt. And he's going to come riding in. Now, the reason why I wanted to kind of turn the map and everything was for us to try to picture what Jesus went through. So if we were to pull up all the asphalt, we'll leave it there for our benefit, but picture Millertown Road with asphalt. Without asphalt, just a dirt road. Now some of you are like, I remember when it was a dirt road, but most of us don't. But it was a dirt road at one time. And so here is Jesus leaving Fowl Hill community, the Fowl Hill Road, and coming down Back Creek, coming up Connor Road, coming up Millertown Road. And so when you stop and think about it, so when we read about the people taking their clothes and putting them in the road and taking palm branches and laying them in the road, it wouldn't be that difficult if you had a handful of people. There were many people here because of the Passover that they were coming to celebrate. But it wouldn't take much, would it, to throw cloaks down and palm branches down and cover one side of the road to the other. And you know what? When would you do that? Why would you do that? You would do that because someone significant or important is coming. And so it wouldn't be that hard to get a mass of people get on either side of the road and start throwing their coats in the way and putting the palm branches down because a celebrity is coming. Now, not a celebrity in the sense of how we think of a celebrity, but someone significant and important is coming. So they've left. So he says, go and get the colt, the donkey and the colt. And he said, tell them that I need them. And so they bring them. And then in verse 5 is where we want to get to. Verse 4. all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, saying, Tell you, the daughter of Zion, behold, my king, thy king, your king, cometh unto thee, sitting upon an ass, and the colt, the foal of an ass. So something is going to happen that was prophesied. So another way that we know that Jesus is for real, and that Jesus is who he was proclaimed to be, was how he came into Jerusalem the week of the Passover of his crucifixion. Because it says, so if you hold your fingers there and turn with me to Zechariah. Now don't throw your pages back too far, because Zechariah is right at the end of the Old Testament. So if you find the beginning of Matthew, go back just a couple, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Malachi is only 3 chapters long, and so when you get from the Matthew, go back a couple pages, you'll see Malachi, then you'll see Zechariah. Zechariah chapter 9 and verse 9. Here is Zechariah over 400 years before Jesus gets on the donkey there at Fowl Hill, grows up Jericho Road, Millertown Road, and is going up to Jerusalem. This is 400 years ago when this was written. And it says, Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass. So how do we know that Jesus is the true, legitimate, the one that they should be looking for? Because 400 years prior it said this is going to happen. And so here is Jesus getting up one morning, after he'd been in Bethany, where Lazarus' house, he's alive, okay? And Mary and Martha, and we're guessing that he stayed there. And then he leaves the house, getting up that morning, and he starts heading towards Jerusalem. And again, he's going to go uphill. Elevation is probably higher than where the Stouts barn is up at the top of the hill, but it gives us that concept. So he's going to leave. He's starting, and he gets to a certain point, about probably where Breakneck and, Back Creek and Connor Road, somewhere in that area would be the Mount of Olives. And then somewhere in that area he said, all right, you guys go ahead and give me that donkey and that colt that I'm supposed to ride on. So they go and get it, and it's just amazing. The Bible doesn't tell us what spurred all of these people. It doesn't tell us, but we can pretty much draw a pretty safe conclusion that the reason why the people would begin to do what they did was because even if they didn't understand, they knew something was going on. So the disciples probably have a little bit of a thinking about, yeah, Jesus is supposed to ride on a colt and he's going to be king. And so they're thinking about that. And so when Jesus says, go get me the donkey, and they bring it, it says that the other accounts mention it. You'll notice it at the top of your notes. All 4 Gospels record this event. Now, not every one of them says the exact same thing, very identical in many ways, but in each one of them, there's a little bit of a different emphasis in it. Now, when Jesus did, this is just a segue here, when Jesus did the miracles that are recorded in the Gospels, like Matthew might record one and the other 3 don't. Mark might record something and the other 3 don't. Sometimes you'll have 2 or 3 that will record something about the event. One of the events that is recorded in all 4 Gospels is this. So each one of these men, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit and writing it for us, is saying, Jesus is the king. So here he is. He asks for the donkey. He asks for the colt. He doesn't say to them, hey, I'm supposed to be the king, put your coats on there so I can get on it. So nothing like that happened. They bring the donkey, and then the people, just starting with the disciples, start putting their cloaks on. And then one says that Jesus got on it, and another one says the disciples put him on it. But the idea is, regardless of whether he got on it or he, along with their help, set him on it, here comes the donkey up the road. And people are then crying, Hosanna, Hosanna. So what is Jesus doing? Jesus is going to Jerusalem, we know, that is to be crucified. But who is Jesus? As it says in Zechariah 9:9, it says, Behold, your king is coming to you. So Jesus is going to be the Savior, the one crucified on the cross, but he is more than that. Jesus is also what? King. We know that he will not rule as king at that time, so that should make us think then, if Jesus went to Jerusalem to be king and that didn't happen, then that must mean what? Jesus ruling as king is what? A future event. But Jesus comes and it says, behold, your king is coming. We know, because we read it in the scriptures, that when Jesus came as king, what happened? That's not what happened. In fact, this is most likely Sunday, because Sabbath was Saturday for them. So most likely Sunday, 6 days prior to the next Sabbath. So this would be like Sunday, which would be similar to our Monday. And Jesus is on this trip. And he begins and they're saying, Hosanna, Hosanna. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So think of this now. So Sunday to Thursday, within 4 days, what happens to the crowd of people? What do they say on Thursday night into Friday? Crucify him. What changed? What changed? A lot of things changed. What mainly changed is because Jesus did not end up being the king that they were expecting. So when they say, behold your king, what do we learn from this? So notice, first of all, we have the presentation of the king. There for your notes, the presenting of the king. So here is Jesus, Matthew 21. There's all 4 gospel accounts. You can go and read. I didn't put the scriptures there for that, but the presenting of the king. Here comes Jesus. He's riding on the donkey and saying, behold your king. And they said, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And that's happening as we're going up this road, going up to the top. And people on both sides. Now, one of the things we don't have is about several 100,000 people up here on the top of the mountain for us to then put people on both sides. But that was going on in Jerusalem because of the Passover that was celebrated once a year. And Jews came. So if you think of it this way, we have a population like we have, and then all of a sudden several thousand people converge on Indian Head and Normalville and Champion and all of that, trying to find a place to stay because there's something happening on the top of this mountain, Jerusalem. And so there's a mass of people just lining the sides of the road, and then people walking with Jesus saying, Hosanna. So we have the presentation of the king. First of all, we want you to notice then, looking at Zechariah or going back to Matthew 21. Notice it was a willing presentation. Your king comes to you. So picture that in your mind just a moment. Here is Jesus coming and saying, I'm your king, but he's coming in humbly and meek and lowly. So it's not about dominance. It's not about authority. It's not about, he's like, I am a king. But it's not about ruling and power and significance. He's like, I'm your king. Now, what should have happened, should have been, he's our king. And they elevated him and they made him their king, but that's not what happened. But he, first of all, is his willing presentation. Your king comes to you. But then it's also very unique. It is a very unique presentation. At Christmas time, there's a song, How Should a King Come? And it's emphasizing Jesus' birth. Jesus shouldn't have been born in a stable in Bethlehem. Jesus shouldn't have come silently in the night. If a son was being born who was going to be king, there should have been a celebration. The same idea is here. How should a king come? He shouldn't come, of all things, riding on an untrained donkey and a colt. That's not how a king comes. Now, regardless of your political preferences, let's just say the president decided to visit our community. Now, what would we be expecting him to arrive in? The limousine, right? The beast, whatever they call that. And not just that, what? There's going to be several vehicles in front, several vehicles in behind, and probably some things up in the air. And what? Because, hey, he's coming, and so people will be like, wow, king is coming. A leader is coming, a significant person is coming. That's how a king comes, right? With pomp and circumstance and celebration and, hype. And here's Jesus riding on a donkey. Now, if it would ever be remotely possible that the president could sneak into a vehicle and nobody even knows that he's in it, and he comes up the road in some little compact vehicle and comes driving up and pulling in and pulls up in our parking lot and says, that sure looks like Donald Trump, acts like Donald Trump, smells like Donald Trump, talks like Donald Trump, moves his hands like Donald Trump. It sure looks like him, but that can't be him because he just pulled up in a little compact car with nobody around him. That's not how a king comes. So the fact that Jesus, the creator of this world, the creator of the universe, King of kings, Lord of lords, comes, spending 3 years with his disciples, and he gets on a donkey. That is not how a king comes. Very unique. Now, what's unique about it is how he's coming, but the message is significant. To ride on a donkey versus a war horse says what? Coming in peace and bringing peace. So, it's a very interesting presentation of the king. He's coming, first of all, voluntarily, willingly, and wants to be, and says, I'm here for you to be your ruler. It's a unique presentation. For him to come in on a donkey is just should boggle our minds. But then notice, with the presentation, there's the prophetic identification. Notice as it says in Matthew 21 and verse 5, it is quoting then Zechariah 9:9. We know that this was meant to be. This is a fulfillment of prophecy. You know what? This is truly Jesus. He's done all these miracles. He's yet to go to the cross. But when we think about Jesus and all that he has done, here is Jesus coming in on a donkey. You know what? This has got to be Jesus. This has got to be him. Because he's riding on a donkey and his colt. So we have the prophetic identification. But then notice we also have the actions of the people. Look at verse 8. And a very great multitude spread their garments in the way. Others cut down branches from the trees and spread them in the road. It's like, what we would say today is like the red carpet. Putting out the red carpet. And I don't know what you put down on a road. You don't put red carpet down on a road. But what would we do if we had somebody come? We'd probably have certain flares. We'd make sure that we got all the debris out of the road. Everything else, everything to present and to say, here comes somebody important. That's what the people were doing. And then on top of that, just like when we have a parade, what do? You line people up on both sides. Because you're celebrating an occasion. So we have the actions of the people. And then we have the affirmation of the people. Notice in verse 9. And the multitudes that went before and those that followed cried, saying, Hosanna, the Son of David. Here's the phrase we want. Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. They probably did not understand what they were saying, but they said, this person on this donkey, coming from Bethany, whatever point they stopped, got the donkey, and he's coming up the road, and they're throwing all the palm branches down. They're saying, you know what? This guy's from the Lord. This person is from the Lord. So they weren't just saying, this is Jesus. They were saying, he's the king. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So they are telling us who he is. Now notice in verse 11, the multitude said that this is Jesus, the prophet of Nazareth of Galilee. They didn't get it. But what they were saying was accurate and true. Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. He is more than Jesus of Galilee. He's more than the one that raised Lazarus from the dead. He's more than the one who gave sight to the blind and then raised up the girl that had died as well. And he's again and again, all of those things. But he is more than that. He is coming with God's authority. He is coming on God's commission. And he is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He is not just Jesus, the prophet of Nazareth of Galilee. So we have the affirmation of the people. But then notice, we have to turn to another passage for this. Go over to Luke 19. Luke 19, this is Luke's account of the time coming into Jerusalem. Luke 19. And verse 41. And when he was come near, so he's just getting closer, probably getting to where, at the bottom of the hill here, getting ready to go up to the top of the hill down in the valley. It says, when he was come near, he beheld the city, and he what? He wept over it. Why would Jesus weep? Here is why. Saying, if you had known, yes, you, at least in this day, the things which belong unto thy peace, but now they are what? Notice this key phrase. They are hid from thine eyes. So even though they're putting down the cloaks, even though they're putting down the palm branches, and they're saying, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna. And it was a raucous moment, celebrative moment. And Jesus gets to Jerusalem and he weeps. Why does he weep? Because he knows the people don't understand. He knows that people don't really know what they're doing. They're doing what they should be. Jesus is who he is, but the people aren't getting it. And what does that do? It breaks Jesus' heart. And he's like, if you would have known, yes, you. Now remember, as he's coming into Jerusalem, yes, there are the Romans that rule them, but there are the Jews that are there. The Jews, what? Should have recognized him, but they don't. And so notice there's, in this presenting of the king, that there's the blindness of the people. Now we aren't there, won't be there, can't be there, and experience that particular moment. But there is a question that we can really ask ourselves. Just like they were blind to seeing who Jesus is, what or where are you failing to see about God and his purposes in your life? In other words, to say it this way, if Jesus, as he's approaching Jerusalem, speaking of it in the Mass, that the Jews don't see it. There's a blindness. They don't get it. Let me ask this question. Would Jesus weep if he was approaching you and say, I weep over you because you're not getting it? Because you're not getting it. What made him weep? Was a spiritual apathy, a spiritual blindness. And you know what? When we aren't growing in our own personal lives like we should be, or pressing toward the mark of the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus, if we are doing everything but going up the road to Jerusalem for worship, if that was us, if that was you, and he's coming up the road and he sees you as he gets into Jerusalem, would he weep over us? Would he weep over each one of us individually? So there's the blindness of the people. And then go over to John chapter 12. This is John's account. And he brings out something else in his account. This is the beauty of the parallels, taking each one of these accounts and being able to read them side by side. I didn't bring it out here, but I actually have a book. It's called The Harmony of the Gospels. I'll encourage you to get it. It's the Harmony of the Gospels, and what it does is it takes all four Gospels and has 4 columns. And each column, so like when I was reading about the Triumphal Entry, I could just take that book and read all 4 passages side by side of this account. So we have the Gospels, we can do it, we just have to make sure we flip pages. But notice John chapter 12 and verse 16. So just to give you the context, verses 13 and 14, they took branches of palm trees, went forth to meet, saying, Hosanna, blessed is he, and was written. Verse 15, here's what was said, but verse 16 is where we want to get to. So I'm just showing you, it's the same exact moment. These things understood not his who? Disciples at first. But when Jesus was glorified, so he then ascended into heaven, and that they had done, notice it, and that they had done these things unto him. They were doing the actions, but did they understand what was really going on? No. But when Jesus was glorified, so John inserts this as he writes this, he goes, we didn't understand what we were doing in the moment, but you know what? We had that aha moment after Jesus was risen and ascended into heaven. They said, what? We understand now. And you know what? We did these things. They had no idea that they were carrying out prophetic fulfillment when they did that. But then they had this aha moment, and it's like, man, Jesus going up to Jerusalem being king. Zechariah 9:9. Now, it wasn't, the scroll of Zechariah, is what they had to get out. But Zechariah 9:9, you know what? That was the moment. We did that. We were a part of that. And I think part of it was from a regret, but then this aha moment that God opened their eyes to the understanding. So there's the limitations of the people. Some of them were blind, but some were limited. So what would be an important lesson for us, and that is that we keep learning and growing and following, and there will be those aha times. And you're like, I didn't see that before. That makes sense now. Oh, I get the connection. Oh, I see how this relates. We often want to understand everything all the time in the moment. But sometimes it's a path of progression. So keep learning and growing. Keep following. And there will be those aha times. So when you're reading something about one of the biblical characters and you're reading that, and then it's like, oh man, you know what? I get that. I can relate to that. I can see the connection. So when David said he was afraid, but then he trusts God, you know what? I get that now. So when David says in 2 Samuel 22 about Jesus, God being his rock and his fortress and the one in whom he could trust, like, I get that. So keep learning and keep growing. So in the presentation of the king, he presented himself. He was prophetically identified by riding on the donkey. The people did and said what was in Zechariah 9:9. The people affirmed who the king was, but many of them were blind, and it broke Jesus' heart. And then there's the limitations. So what would be some good application for us as we look at what happened and we look at the responses of the people? So these are just 5 closing prayers that should be and ought to be, and I hope is, the attitude of our hearts. Number 1, Lord, help me to discover more about you each day. That the Bible isn't just a book. That the Bible isn't just words on a page. That the Bible is not some antiquated. But the Bible is living, powerful, sharper. Lord, help me discover more about you each day. That's who's in the Bible, my friends. Secondly, Lord, may I worship you more frequently. Now they did it, giving him all kinds of worship as the donkey was going up the road. But we know in 4 days they turn on him. But may it not just be the riding on the donkey moment. May we worship God more frequently. Thirdly, another prayer, Lord, help me to tell others about you daily. Whether they understood what they were doing, they were saying as Jesus walked by, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, he's king. You know what? We need to be doing that not just on one day, not just Easter, not just leading up to Easter, but it should be a habit of our lives. A habit of our lives. Lord, help me to tell others about you daily. And then the fourth one's a little bit different than the first one. But Lord, I want to know you more personally. I want to know you more personally. You know, this isn't something that just have on and off moments. It's something that we should crave and desire, but the only way, and I'm telling you this, the only way that you can do it is by getting into the Bible. It's the only way you can do it, is by getting into the Bible. Personally, in your own personal devotions, your own personal reading, but Bible study, Sunday school, those are just opportunities to hunger and thirst for the Lord and get to know him. And then lastly, Lord, as I seek to keep growing, help me grow in understanding. So just like the disciples had that we get it now moment, that's what we're saying. Lord, help me to grow in understanding. And may God help us to do that. Let's stand together in prayer. Arnold, would you close this morning, please?